This scene in the Goblet of Fire movie has always confused me. If I hadn't read the book before watching the movie, I would have been even more confused, but the crazy thing is that even with the context of the book, it still doesn't make that much sense. Because of the time constraints of a feature film and the length of the Goblet of Fire book, much of Harry's fourth year is cut up and condensed. While the book has 4 chapters in between the second and third task, which detail multiple key plot points, the movie jump cuts from point to point at breakneck speed. One moment, Harry is leaving the second task, the next, Barty Crouch is dead, the next, Harry finds the pensive, and then suddenly we're at the third task. When in reality, these 2 final tasks were months apart from one another. It's just boom, 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 one thing right after the other without the narrative actually taking the time to explain anything that's happening. And my theory is that the creators of the movies were just banking on the fact that Harry Potter fans would be so familiar with the book that they'd be able to fill in the gaps themselves. Well, that only holds up if you actually stick to what the book says, and spoiler, the movie does not. So I thought today we'd slow things down a bit and look through some of these missing chapters to fill in these crucial gaps. We'll uncover things like Sirius Black's return and the trio visiting him in a cave, Victor Crumb asking Harry if he has feelings for Hermione, and Hagrid nearly pummeling Karkaroff into a tree, plus much more. My name is Gibby and welcome to Fact or Fantasy Harry Potter. This is a place where we talk about all things wizarding, and you've happened to stumble upon episode 55 of my series, Movies vs. Manuscripts. That's right, episode 55. So if that's news to you, then you've got a lot of catching up to do. So be sure to check out the playlist linked in the description to learn all about the differences between the first 3 books and movies. As for today though, we're continuing on our journey through Harry's 4th year, and per usual in this book, things are getting nearly impossible to compare. While the movie spends a couple of short minutes on Barty Crouch's death, the book dedicates multiple chapters to this complicated plot point, all while introducing about a dozen other key details along the way. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride as we unpack a few of these chapters. As always, I'll cover the differences across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But just a heads up, the plot section is going to be primarily a chapter-by-chapter breakdown, because let's be real, every single thing is different, which makes it impossible to count them as one-by-one changes. But we'll still have our character, timeline, and location categories for this week. Anyway, per usual, let's do a brief recap of what the scene shows in the movie. That way it's fresh on our mind for the analysis. Picking up from the end of the second task, we see Harry get taken aside by Barty Crouch and they make awkward conversation before getting interrupted by Mad-Eye Moody. Moody makes a comment to Crouch and then flicks his tongue out, which catches Crouch by surprise. Barty then runs off abruptly, leaving Moody there with Harry. But do we get any more info? No, why would they do something like give us context? Instead, the movie cuts straight to Hagrid, Hermione, Ron, and Harry, all walking through the woods, and I don't really know why. I mean, it's kind of dark out, and Hermione still has a towel on like this is immediately after the second task, so you're telling me they're just now walking back? But it's dark? And no one else is around? I don't know. It doesn't make much sense. But anyway, Hagrid is praising Harry, but suddenly Harry finds Barty Crouch lying in the woods dead. Then the movie cuts again to Harry making his way to Dumbledore's office and overhearing the headmaster speaking with Fudge, the Minister of Magic. Dumbledore is upset with Fudge and essentially calls him a coward, but before things can go further, Moody tells them that Harry is eavesdropping outside. And that's as far into these scenes as we're going today, because in the next episode, we'll cover the memory of Karkaroff's trial. So now let's dive into these first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location. First up, we have characters, which is a list so long that it won't even fit on the screen. So I'm just going to highlight the important figures here. First, we're missing Sirius. As we'll soon cover, there's a whole chapter dedicated to the trio visiting Sirius outside of Hogsmeade, but in the movie he got completely cut. Second, we're missing various other students like Draco, Pansy, Crabbe and Goyle, and Padma Patil. On top of this, we're also missing Hogwarts staff like Snape, McGonagall, Trelawney, and Professor Binns. Next, there's Percy, who weasels his way into almost every chapter of this book, but that's mainly because he takes over for Barty Crouch after his disappearance. Thinking that his boss is just taking a well-deserved vacation, Percy is more than happy to assume command. And lastly, we're missing Bertha Jorkins, who of course isn't physically present, but is mentioned once again. Now moving on to timeline, we have a convoluted mess this week. But to keep it basic, all you need to realize is that the second task was on February 24th, and the third task was on June 24th. So, enough said. And finally, before we head into the meat and potatoes of our breakdown, we have location, which similarly to characters has a boatload of places to mention. However, for the sake of time, here are the main two. First, we're missing Hogsmeade. Like I said earlier, the trio go to Hogsmeade and then visit Sirius near there. And second, the movie removes the castle and all the included locations therein. What I mean by this is that during those 4 months of waiting in between tasks, Harry has classes and lives a normal life, which we read about in these chapters. But because the movie cuts out these 4 months, all of those locations are cut. Simple places like Snape's dungeon, the Great Hall, and Hagrid's hut are all removed despite them being key locations for this part of Harry's year. Of course, to see why they're key locations, we need to head into our final section, which is plot, aka chapter breakdowns for this week. But first, I want to give a huge shout out to Maha, Jason, Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, and all of my other incredible Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. And also, I think it goes without saying, but I can't cover these chapters word for word. For legal reasons, but also because that would take forever. So, if you're wanting to keep up to date and follow along in the books with me as I do this series, then I highly encourage you check out the audiobooks on Audible. You can use the link in the description to claim the Goblet of Fire for free, or you can claim any other Harry Potter audiobook if you'd like. The link gets you 1 month free of Audible, and you can cancel at any time. It supports the channel as well, so it's a win-win. Anyway, with that being said, let's dive into these chapter breakdowns. Like I mentioned earlier, diving into dense chapters like these and comparing them to the movie can get a little intense. If I actually counted one by one, I'd have over 100 differences to go through, which is why it's easiest just to break things down chapter by chapter. And to make things easier, you should look at this as 3 main sections, aka the 3 main chapters. First is chapter 27, which covers the trio's visit with Sirius. Second is chapter 28 and discusses Barty Crouch, and third is chapter 29, which highlights another dream that Harry has. But the reason I call them sections is because inside of these chapters, there are overarching themes with dozens of tidbits to be picked out. So let's start off with chapter 27, which is titled Padfoot Returns, and dive right into the first page, which tells us all about the aftermath of the second task. The first thing we read is that Ron is loving life, as he finally is in the spotlight with everyone wanting to hear about what it was like to be a hostage in the lake. After a week of embellishing the story little by little, Ron eventually got to a point where he was telling people that he fought off 50 mer people who had to beat him into submission before tying them up. It's not until Hermione makes a snarky remark at him for this exaggeration that he backed off to the original version of being put to sleep before being taken to the lake. The chapter then goes into March, which was windy and dry, but it at least held some excitement as they heard back from Sirius, who told them to meet him in Hogsmeade. Harry was of course livid at this, afraid that Sirius was risking too much by coming close to civilization. Remember, Sirius is still considered a criminal by the wizarding world. But before their meeting with Sirius, they first have to survive through one more class on Friday, which is double potions. And unfortunately, it's more torturous than usual. Why? Well, Pansy Parkinson and the other Slytherins are waiting for the trio to arrive at class and show Hermione the newest Rita Skeeter article in Witch Weekly. This article talks all about Harry Potter's secret heartache, as Rita claims that Hermione has broken Harry's heart by taking an interest in Victor Crumb. Surprisingly, Hermione brushes this off for the time being, but unfortunately, Snape notices them reading the magazine in class, takes it, and reads the article aloud for all to hear. Then, after the trio are thoroughly embarrassed, Snape separates them, with Harry being taken up next to the teacher's desk. Then we read about 2 key points. First, Snape confronts Harry about stealing supplies from his office once again, boomsling skin and gillyweed to be precise. Harry denies stealing either of them, and in a way, it's the truth. Harry thinks Dobby must have stolen the gillyweed, and Hermione took the boomsling skin back in their second year. Little does Harry know that this is actually a telltale sign of the Polyjuice potion Barty Crouch Jr. is making on a regular basis. This moment is actually shown in the movie after the pensive scene, but in a completely different context, not at class. And speaking of which, in that same scene in the movie, we see Karkaroff speaking to Snape in the potion supply closet. Funnily enough, the second key point that takes place after Snape moves Harry in the book is Karkaroff barging in and demanding to speak to Snape during class. Snape obviously isn't interested, but Karkaroff insists, and Harry eavesdrops as Karkaroff tells Snape that something on his arm has grown clearer. I'll probably address this in the next episode, but a difference here is that in the book, Harry doesn't see what's on Karkaroff's arm, whereas in the movie, he does. Anyway, the potions class wraps up, and the book fast forwards to the next day as the trio head to Hogsmeade. And before heading to the spot where they're supposed to meet Sirius, they stop by a shop to buy some gross-looking socks for Dobby. But eventually, they meet up with Sirius in his dog form, and he leads them to a cave where he and Buckbeak are staying. Remember, I can't cover this word for word, so it's best that you go read their entire conversation for yourself or listen to it on Audible, because it's many, many pages long. But to summarize it, Sirius tells them about Barty Crouch and his son. This is the time in the book when we finally learn about the history of Barty Crouch Jr. The trio learn about how Barty Crouch Sr. sentenced his own son to Azkaban, and then the son died shortly after being put in. No one knew if the son was actually guilty, and Barty Crouch was a ruthless judge who vied for the position of minister. After the son died in Azkaban, though, the people's opinion turned on Barty, and Fudge got the job. Sirius isn't surprised that Barty Crouch was seen on the map snooping through Snape's office, but Sirius isn't fully trusting of Barty either. Sirius is also very confused why Winky the house elf was saving a seat for Barty during the World Cup, but Barty never sat in the seat. And then Crouch fired Winky shortly after. After this talk about Barty Crouch Sr., they briefly talk about Bertha Jorkins, who Sirius recalls as a witch who had a knack for gossip and could never keep her mouth shut, which makes sense as we later find out her fate at the hands of Voldemort. But on that note, their time is up and they must head back to the castle, leaving Sirius there in the cave. Oh, and gross but fun fact is that we learned Sirius had been eating rats to stay alive. So from that point on, Harry sent Sirius packages of food for him and Buckbeak. And now that brings us to our next big section, which is all about Barty Crouch. I do find it interesting because the corresponding movie scenes that we discussed earlier do focus on Barty Crouch as well, but it's just a shallow and lacking version of what the book gives. I mean, just in that first chapter with the conversation with Sirius, we learn 10 times more about Barty than the movie ever shows. I know I didn't cover it all, but Sirius tells the trio about Barty's political career, his family life, and more, and it isn't over yet. Now, just for some context, remember that Barty Crouch is supposedly sick at home right now, overworked and taking a much-needed rest. Percy Weasley, as his right-hand man, has taken over operations at the Ministry and is being sent owls from Barty with instructions for work, but no one has actually seen Barty Crouch in months. So now with that context, Chapter 28, which is titled The Madness of Mr. Crouch, picks up with the trio getting back to the castle and deciding to go to the kitchens to give their gift to Dobby. Plus, they figure they can get some food to mail to Sirius while they're there. So they head down to the kitchens, and after giving Dobby his gift, they see Winky clutching a bottle of butterbeer and swaying on her stool. Dobby whispers to them that she's been getting through 6 bottles a day now, and that may not seem like a bad thing, but butterbeer is like alcohol to house elves. It actually makes them drunk. Anyway, the trio go up to Winky and try to speak with her. Through broken speech and hiccups, they learn that Winky still thinks Barty Crouch is her master, even though she was fired, and she tells them that her master can't operate on his own. He has secrets that she keeps for him, and without her, he can't manage. But before they can get these secrets out of her, Winky falls off of her stool, hits the ground, and passes out snoring. Before leaving the kitchen, by the way, Hermione once again tries to persuade the house elves to stop living in slavery, but they're all angered at her message. They quickly shove food in Ron's hand and essentially kick the trio out of the kitchens. Even Dobby looks at Hermione and mumbles for her to leave him out of this, because the elves obviously aren't too happy with Dobby's choices. He's treated like an outcast because he gets pay from Dumbledore. So the trio are forced out without any more information, other than the fact that Winky told them she has dark secrets that she kept for Barty Crouch. Now, before the chapter picks back up on that thread, it dives into some regular school activities, which might seem pointless at first, but actually contain some really crucial moments for the subplots of this book. Specifically, at breakfast the next day, Hermione gets hate mail because of Rita Skeeter's article, with one letter even containing a liquid that causes her hand to swell up. Then after this, they have Care of Magical Creatures class, and Hagrid brings out Nifflers, which all the students have fun with. Ron is fascinated with these creatures who hunt for gold and money, but something interesting happens here. At one point, Hagrid tells Crabbe and Goyle not to bother stealing the gold that he buried because it's leprechaun gold and will disappear soon. Ron hears this and puts the pieces together that Harry never told him about the gold. Ron had paid Harry in leprechaun gold back at the World Cup, but Harry never told him that the gold disappeared. This annoys Ron, as Harry says that he didn't notice, and Ron says that he'd notice if a bunch of gold just disappeared on him. While this may seem unimportant, it's a good bit of character building for Ron, and it plays into Fred and George's subplot, which we'll hear about in a moment. Anyway, Hermione gets back from the hospital wing near the tail end of Hagrid's class, and she still is curious about how Rita Skeeter found out the information that she put in her article. After all, Rita isn't allowed on school grounds and wasn't at the second task, but somehow she knew the exact quotes that Victor had said to Hermione in private. Hermione vows to find out Rita's secret if it's the last thing she does. And boy oh boy do we see that come true later on, and perhaps Hermione's most cruel moment of the series. But that's a topic for a later episode. Now, to pick back up with the Barty Crouch plotline, the chapter goes on to tell us about how Harry had to go down to the Quidditch pitch along with the other champions to find out from Ludo Bagman what their third task would be. Of course, we know that it's the maze, and per usual, Ludo tried to pull Harry aside to give him advice, as he's done with both of the other tasks. However, before Ludo can take Harry away, someone else pulls him aside, and that person would be none other than Viktor Krum. Why? Well, it seems that he too heard about the Rita Skeeter article, and he takes Harry into the forest to ask him a very important question. Are he and Hermione a thing? Harry insists that they aren't and tells Victor multiple times that he and Hermione are just friends. After this confirmation, Victor calms down a bit and compliments Harry on his flying, which immediately goes to Harry's head. And why not? After all, Victor is the best seeker in the world. But before they can start nerding out about Quidditch, Harry overhears something and pulls Victor behind cover. And then the unthinkable happens. Barty Crouch himself emerges from the woods and is mumbling to himself. He keeps giving out orders to an imaginary Percy Weasley and talking about his wife and son, who Harry had just learned are both dead. So obviously, Barty has gone mad, hence the name of the chapter. Victor is shocked and obviously doesn't handle these situations well, but Harry, who has been in multiple situations like this, takes charge and approaches Mr. Crouch. Suddenly, upon Harry's approach, Barty seems to snap out of it and grabs Harry, telling him that he must speak to Dumbledore immediately. He keeps repeating over and over that he's done a horrible thing and needs to speak to Dumbledore, but he won't let go of Harry. Eventually, Harry escapes Barty's grasp and assigns Victor to watch over the obviously insane Mr. Crouch. Leaving Victor, Harry runs up to the castle and fetches Dumbledore. But by the time he and Dumbledore get back down to the school grounds, where Victor was left, Crouch is gone. And not only is Barty Crouch gone, but Victor is stunned, completely knocked out on the ground. This all happens super fast, and eventually we have Hagrid and Karkaroff joining Harry, Dumbledore, and Victor. Karkaroff is livid, thinking that Dumbledore set this up and had someone attack his student. He even goes as far as to spit at Dumbledore's feet, which is a big mistake, as Hagrid grabs Karkaroff, lifts him up, and shoves him against a nearby tree, demanding that he apologize to Dumbledore. This is probably the angriest that we've seen Hagrid so far in the series, and it almost feels like he has a lot of pent-up emotion from the Rita article about him being a giant. And it also might be the author's way of trying to signal to us that he is a half-giant and has a bit of a temper sometimes, when in reality, this is quite out of character for Hagrid. Anyway, after letting Karkaroff go at Dumbledore's command, he takes Harry back to the castle and talks the whole way about how Karkaroff, Madame Maxime, and the whole lot are all bad. Remember, Hagrid is upset at Madame Maxime for how she reacted to him asking her about being a half-giant. And something that I haven't mentioned is that in these chapters, we get tidbits here and there about how Madame Maxime seems to be trying to win back Hagrid's affection, as she randomly would show up to his class or his hut and try to speak with him. But at this point, Hagrid has had his heart broken and isn't in a forgiving mood. Anyway, this is where the chapter ends, with Hagrid escorting Harry back to the castle, and Barty Crouch Sr. just having disappeared after having an ominous message for Dumbledore that he never got to deliver. As you can see, this is drastically different from the movie. Barty Crouch doesn't see Moody do a tongue flick because Barty has already disappeared weeks earlier. Barty Crouch's body isn't randomly found in the woods, he is found walking out of the woods looking insane and tells Harry that he's done something horrible. And then he disappears entirely, no body to be found. And in all of that mess, Viktor Krum is attacked as well, causing a whole uproar from Karkaroff and the Durmstrang gang. Again, this is all nowhere to be found in the movie, and we aren't even done yet, as we have one final section, which is chapter 29. So let's not waste any time and jump right into this final chapter of today's analysis, which will reveal even more to us that never gets addressed in the movie. Unlike the film, the book doesn't cut straight to Harry going to Dumbledore's office. In fact, he doesn't do that until the end of this chapter, and he goes to Dumbledore's office for an entirely different reason than Barty Crouch's disappearance. The trio are actually told that they can do nothing about Crouch, and to put him out of their minds, allowing Harry to focus on the third task and prepare for that. So the trio do just that. They go to their classes, of course talking about the Crouch situation, but mainly focusing on Harry's upcoming maze task. But let's rewind a little bit because there's a little detail at the beginning of this chapter that I need to address. The trio go to the Owlery to update Sirius on the latest developments in this Barty Crouch situation, and while they're there, they overhear Fred and George walking up the steps. They stay quiet and eavesdrop as they hear the twins arguing with each other about sending a letter. The trio hear the words blackmail, Ministry of Magic, and nice fat payoff, amongst other things as well. Obviously, the twins are up to no good, but who are they blackmailing? Ron tries to confront them, but Fred and George won't tell. Spoiler alert, it's Ludo Bagman, and it has to do with some leprechaun gold that he gave them. But the trio don't know that yet, and they walk away wondering what type of trouble the twins are getting into this time. Anyway, after a while, Sirius replies to their letter and reprimands Harry for walking off in the dark with Victor Crumb, telling Harry not to leave Gryffindor Tower unless he's with Ron or Hermione, and to definitely not go out after dark. So Harry obeys and starts to prepare for the third task by learning some hexes and spells to help him in the maze. And eventually, we read about a divination class in which Harry falls asleep, and while he's asleep, he has another dream. But this dream is different than the other ones that he's had because it shows Wormtail getting tortured by Voldemort because of some blunder that he's made. It ends with Harry on the floor of divination class screaming as if he were being tortured, and he wakes up with everyone surrounding him, and he goes straight to Dumbledore's office. Similarly to the movie, he overhears Fudge inside talking with Dumbledore, although not nearly as argumentative as the movie shows. Then Moody reveals Harry, and that is where the chapter ends, on a cliffhanger. So I know that was a lot, but congratulations for sticking around until the end. Personally, this is one of my favorite books because things escalate very quickly compared to the first three. It's a massive plot in which you've got about a dozen subplots running through the narrative, and it's fun to keep up with them all. Every time I read through these chapters, I notice more and more tiny details that I hadn't before. And I hope these videos reveal some of those to you as we relive this epic story. Let me know in the comments what you would have changed about this scene in the movie. Could you have fit these chapters in somehow without going way over time? Or was the movie forced to cut stuff like this Barty Crouch subplot? As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and check out the playlist in the description to catch up on any episodes you might have missed so far. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.